Hi everyone, this is Jonathon Frost from the Azure Postgres team. In this demo, I'm going to show how to migrate an existing Postgres workload into Azure Database for Postgres Flex Server using the migration service built directly into Azure. Let's start with the application. On the screen, I have a sample application that is currently connected to my source Postgres database. This source database is running in an on-premises environment. I'll first show that the application is live and reading from the source database. Now I'm going to insert some new records. Now I'll use our VS Code extension to verify that the record exists in our source database. Lastly, I'm going to again use our VS Code extension for Postgres and use our Visualize Schema feature to show the structure of the tables that we're going to be migrating to Azure Postgres. Now let's switch to Azure. Here I have an Azure Database for Postgres Flex Server already created. This will be the target for the migration. From the Flexible Server page, I'll go to the Migration tab on the left-hand navigation menu. This brings us to the migration landing page for Flexible Server. To start a new migration, I'll select Create. Now we're in the migration setup experience. First, I'll give the migration a name. Next, I'll select the source type. In this demo, the source is an on-premises Postgres server. The same migration service can also be used for Postgres sources running in other environments, including Azure Virtual Machines, Amazon RDS for Postgres, Amazon Aurora Postgres, and Google Cloud SQL for Postgres. Next, I'm going to select the Validate and Migrate option because it checks the setup before the migration starts. Now I'll select the migration mode. For this demo, I'm choosing Online Migration. With Online Migration, the source application can continue running while the migration service performs the initial database copy. After that initial database copy, changes from the source continue to replicate into the Azure target. On the next screen, the migration wizard asks about runtime and connectivity. Now I'll enter the source Postgres server details. This is the on-premises Postgres server my application is currently using. I'll enter my server DNS name. The Postgres port is 5432. Then I'll enter the username and password for the source Postgres server. Now I'll test the connection to the source. The connection is successful. This confirms that Azure can reach the source Postgres server and authenticate successfully. Next, I'll enter the target server details. The target is my Azure Database for Postgres Flex Server. I'll provide the target credentials. Now I'll validate the connection to my Azure target. The target connection is also successful. Now I'll select the database I want to migrate. For this demo, I'll be migrating the database used by the application we saw at the beginning. Now we're at the summary page. Before starting, I'll review the configuration. Everything looks good, so I'll start the validation and migration. Now the migration has been created, and we're returned to the migration landing page. I can open the migration details to monitor the progress. Now the migration service is running. Let's monitor the lifecycle of the migration together. First, the migration service performs the validation. This is now complete. The next step is the service fetches properties on the source and target servers. Next, the service is initializing database. This performs the initial copy of the database objects and data from the source Postgres server into the Azure Postgres server. Lastly, because this is an online migration, the service continues synchronizing changes from the source to the target after the initial copy. At this point, we can see the details of the migration process, which shows the successful validation details and successful table count details in the Azure Postgres target database. While the migration is still running in synchronization mode, let's go back to the application. Remember, the application is still connected to the source Postgres database. I'm going to launch another instance of the application. This time, the only difference is the connection string environmental variable has been already changed to point to the target Azure Postgres database. I will now show the original application connected to the source on-premises Postgres database side by side with a second instance of the same application connected to our Azure Postgres target database. You can see on these screens the connection string for each application instance. The important point here is that no code was needed to change for the application to talk to the Azure Postgres database. Next, I will add 5 new records to the actors table in the application instance connected to the source Postgres server. You will see the same 5 records flow into our target Azure Postgres server and visualize in our application instance connected to that database. This highlights the online migration capabilities and how the source and target will stay in sync until ready for the final cutover. We are now ready to perform the cutover. I will click the cutover button to initiate the process. After a few moments, the migration service completes final synchronization and finalizes the migration. Once cutover is complete, the Azure Postgres database becomes the new database of record. Back to the application, you can see the application instance connected to the Azure Postgres database is still running and connected. Now let's take a look at the target Azure Postgres database by performing a schema visualization back in our VS Code extension. Looks good. All the tables and relationships are intact from the migration. Before I wrap up, I also want to show that this migration experience is not limited to the Azure portal. The same migration workflow can also be ran from the Azure CLI, which is useful for automation and repeatable migration projects. The CLI flow starts with a JSON file that defines the migration properties. Once the JSON file is prepared, I can use the Azure CLI to create the migration. This command creates the migration against the target Azure Postgres server. After the migration is created, I can check the status using the show command. Then, as a final step, I can initiate the cutover with the update command using the cutover flag. That completes the online migration and finalizes the Azure Postgres database as the new database of record. So whether I use the Azure portal or the Azure CLI, the migration service gives me a managed and repeatable way to validate, migrate, monitor, and cut over Postgres workloads into Azure. Before closing, I want to show how to find and install the VS Code Postgres extension that I used during this demo. This is a powerful tool for developers and database teams because it lets you connect to Postgres directly from VS Code, run database queries, browse database objects, visualize schemas, and more. To get started, I'll go to VS Code and open the extensions view. Here, I'll search for Postgres. The extension I want is Postgres by Microsoft. From here, I can install the extension directly into VS Code. Now I'll switch to the Azure Learn documentation. This page is a good starting point for the migration service. From here, you can review the overview, supported source environments, online and offline migration guidance, and Azure CLI commands. Thank you for watching, and we can't wait to see what you build with Azure Postgres next.